Hello, everyone. That Weems guy here for another episode. We're recording this on Sunday, September the 25th at 3:33 p.m. Eastern Time because Bryan Eastridge is helping me pull a rabbit out of the hat so that we get an episode recorded this week. How you doing, Bryan?
I'm great.
And
Rabbit
this,
pulling today.
because if it wasn't for Bryan bailing me out right here, we would not have an episode this week. Isn't it tough when like your real life work schedule and everything gets in the way of your podcasting hobby?
I keep telling people my jobs keep getting in the way of my career.
That's
So
right. Yeah, and we're also testing. Bryan has been on several times, and there's always something with the Zoom and Bryan's mic, and maybe we've got that fixed. So we're hoping that is the case today. So Bryan was trying to explain me how to fix that on my end, and I know nothing about audio testing and fixing and all that stuff. So maybe we got it going.
hopefully,
Hopefully. All right. Well, Bryan, as you probably know from past episodes, is a career cop in the middle part of America, the best part of America that's still America, that has the best ice cream that you can get, and which is Brahms, of course. And we talk on a regular, consistent basis. He's part of a textcapade, which is the only way I can describe that text string that is just constant source for entertainment and show topics. And today's episode will be the basics mastered versus entertainment. So
yeah.
Bryan, take it away.
So the textcapade, yeah, we will not disclose or divulge all the characters in the textcapade, but it gets rather intriguing and in between, mild insults to people's sensibilities, and there is some good value that comes out of it, right? And Wayne Dobbs and I got the great fortune of teaching at Concealed Carry Inc.'s Guardian Conference last weekend, and we were sitting on the bench, drinking water and just doing what old cops do and talking cop stories and all this. And my dad got involved, and so, and then Chuck Haggard, and we're kind of just exchanging incidents and ideas and stuff. And I noticed this really interesting thing that occurred was that like Dobbs and I were teaching basics mastered. And these are, I'm 2 days away from a 20-year anniversary here. So I'm not going to like break my arm patting myself on the back or anything, but I mean, I've lived in a violent culture for the last 20 years, and Dobbs, same thing, 25 years in Texas as a cop, plus like 2.5 years overseas in Iraq. We've seen a little bit of violence, both of us, enough for 20 lifetimes, but what we started to see was, the guys that are very competition based or very like sport based shooters, they really lean heavy towards what our mutual friend Dave Spalding called entertainment. So yes, you're training, but there is an entertainment value attached to it. Like you're really pushing the limits of your equipment and your personal performance. And the guys that have been immersed in the violent culture for so long tend to really focus on mastering just the basics. And there's a place in the world for both of those things. And they can, I hate to use this term, but they can coexist. They really function well together. But it was just a topic that came up, and I thought, here's a live action example of, here's our blocks down at this end of the bay, and we are just regimenting the basics mastered. And consequently, the student feedback that we got from the people that went to like moving and shooting classes or dot specific classes or things that were a little more focused on one aspect of operation of a handgun were set up for a much more successful experience having gone through the basics mastered. So it was a topic that was on my mind. Like, why is that? Why do we have such cultural divides between those two groups of like open enrollment instructors when in reality, we're both trying to achieve a similar mission, right? Make people more dangerous so they can live more safely, right? So there it
Well,
is.
I think you've actually answered your own question as where is that divide from? Uh, 6 months ago or however long ago it was, you and I were trying to see how quickly we could break the internet with like
Oh yeah.
posting different things just to see what the reactions would be. And I put up one that was, and I'm going to have to paraphrase because I don't remember my exact words, were people who have actually had actual exposures to violence tend to focus on, the mechanics or the skills and the decision making. And the people who to all this is theoretical tend to focus on the metrics. And I do think that does come down into it. Like I said, you and Dobbs have lived 20 years plus years in the actual application world, and you tend to focus on the things that are vitally successful for that world. And the people who have not had that exposure tend to focus on what the timer shows them, what the points on the target show them, everything else. And I'm not knocking them for that, but it's two vastly different perspectives that can actually can coexist, but you can't sacrifice the decision making and the sure techniques for the speed techniques.
Yeah, you can't have one without the other.
Right.
And and I don't think you can put too much emphasis on one over the other.
Right.
I got to meet another instructor. I won't throw his name out there, who we just happened to notice each other was wearing a fancy watch, right? Because that's something gun guys in that culture, right? And we are from two very, very different aspects of application of the handgun. And I walk in, I'm like, hey man, nice this, that, and the other. And he's, hey, yeah, cool, dude. How long did you wait for that? And we go through our watch nerd and he says, what was your name? And I tell him, and he goes, man, you're a really nice guy. I went, oh, so are you? Like, and he goes, yeah, if I went by all the times that you've incensed the internet with some inflammatory post, I'd think you're a real jerk. And I said, well, I don't really pay attention to anybody else's stuff. I mean, within a limited few, but I said, no, I'm just like a normal dude, man. I just try to inspire a little conversation once in a while. But it was just funny that was had we known each other's names beforehand, it might have been a whole different conversation. And that dude lives in the realm of high level shooting, high level performance with high level guns and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And we're like at a conference and we're just trying to permeate information to the masses. There's no contention there. And later on in conversations, other people went, man, the students that came out of you and Dobbs class were set up a lot better fundamentally to take on the information that we were putting out. So I looked at and go, we work hand in hand here. And if we didn't have and I don't mean this to sound derogatory, if we didn't have the entertainment where people are pushing performance, there's only so many people that are going to come and take a basics mastered class over and over and over again. Right.
Yeah. Speaking of the basics mastered,
Mm-hmm.
I've run classes where it's basically been the same drill all day.
Mm-hmm.
You just shot different variations of it and with different layers of complexity added onto it. And at the end of the day, I asked the students we were doing around it, so how many different drills did you shoot today? And well, we shot, 7 or 8. You shot the same drill all day long. It was just presented to you in different formats. Because it's like, I see this necessity and we're going to approach it so that you can execute these skills regardless of the circumstances. And that's when you get to where your basics mastered. Is our mutual friend DB was always talking about his training program when he was with his agency. Is 2 to the chest, 1 to the head if the head is still there, under any circumstances.
Yeah.
And you instill that in, Okay. From the metric side of the house, people want to get out and run 2 to the chest, 1 to the head as fast as they can go. Okay, that requires pre-decision making that I'm going to draw and shoot 2 to the body, 1 to the head, and I know the head's going to be there because it's a cardboard or paper target and it's stationary. That's not a failure drill as described by the people who invented the failure drill. There's an assessment step between the 2 to the chest and the 1 to the head if the head is still there.
Absolutely. And many times I've seen students, and it's more apparent in the conference environment than it is in the open enrollment environment, because in the open enrollment, 8 to 24 hours of training you're going to immerse in with one instructor, you're going to have some notion about like what that's going to involve and what your skill level is kind of needed to be to really take on the information. I mean, Jed Linsky, for instance, one of his blocks, I remember there's like a prerequisite that said you should be able to clean dot torture at 3 yards, within certain parameters, or you're going to get buried. You're going to be behind the curve. So people sign up for that and they go, okay, well, I kind of know what I'm getting into. Whereas some other, like a conference environment we talked about, it is come one, come all, ages 21 to 80, skill levels not required, right? Or proficient. There's no real proficiency level that you're going to require of someone to come take a block at a conference. And you and I will both soundly agree that teaching at a conference is many times more challenging than your own show, right?
Right.
So I look at both of those aspects of it and I go, if you have the basics mastered of, marksmanship, mindset, gun handling, there's a new concept, right? All of the follow-on training with metrics becomes much more digestible, right? And those skill sets that you're honing to get to those levels, if you don't have the basics mastered, you're turning time and ammo into noise and just inefficiency. So there's that. And then the context of things. And I talk a lot about context in open enrollment, how fast we can shoot a bill drill under perfect conditions versus how fast can we assess shot to shot where we're not going to lose any of our accuracy. We're going to have acceptable accuracy. We're going to have 100% accountability on everything. That's two very different worlds.
Right.
So yeah, assessments.
Yeah. Well, let's discuss the bill drill for a second. And for our audience, that's from the holster, 6 shots as fast as you can go into the zone of a target. All right. I can argue from the skill metric side of that, there are certain things these points of being able to do it, say plus 2 seconds versus sub 2 second, is a bright line dividing line in the competition world. And from a technical skill standpoint, that requires that you have executed a perfect draw, probably at about this, in probably a second or less, and that you're breaking splits at 0.25 or less to get that 2-second bill drill. Okay, that's all fine and well technical. If you're actually putting that into the application world, that A zone is not going to be in the same place for all 6 shots.
Probably not, right?
It's just not going to stand there and let you put 6 rounds into it because it's going to be reacting to being shot or shot at. And while yes, the skills of being able to perform that to that technical level carry over to the application side of the house, that does not mean that because one can do the technical side that they're going to be able to successfully apply it. I do believe there is carryover, there's correlation, because as we've said on the show numerous times, the more skillful you are, the less of your brain power has to go towards the actual operation of the tool. And so that frees up brain power for processing information and decision making. But I think that's one of the differences between people who have lived in the application world versus people who live purely in the technical world, is they don't see some of the, they won't accept that whole premise, I guess is a better way to put it.
Right. And, context. Put me with a leg drop open Safariland 012 with a trigger guard retention system, staggered magazines on a compression belt, on a flat range. Okay. I can get a pretty good metric of performance on, and dive into the rabbit hole of how fast is my recoil spring working the gun? What grain of bullet am I shooting? What powder charge am I shooting to make a power floor? And there is a vast skill and knowledge base inside of just that little realm.
Right.
I go, okay, now let's apply that to my G45 with, 147 grain gold dot bonded hollow points in a concealment rig under how many layers of clothes or whatever it may be. So the context of those two things is very, very different, right? Maybe include a couple of no shoots or reduce the target size to, say, a B8 and a high center chest. Well, you start adding all this context to it, and that metric gets really skewed one way or the other, right? So yeah, there's a lot of things that we have to put into context, and part of the things that I'm seeing personally in the training realm are, if we don't have the basics mastered and we go try to train to these metrics, it's a train wreck because we don't understand the context of the application.
Right.
Makes sense. No, I'm trying not to be too wordy. But there again, when we equate this to real life, to like the potential taking of a human life and all the after effects of it, I kind of look at the shooting portion should be the most simple piece of that entire equation. It's all the things leading up to, around, at the time of, and after. Right. So in the context of that, how I train will be very differently than if I'm chasing a GM card, or I'm trying to determine some metric for performance that I want to not only achieve, but break. Right. Let's face it, if we didn't have like Robbie Latham and Bryan Enos, even the basics mastered training would be vastly different than it is now. Right.
Right. And I can turn it around and put some things where metrics become important for the application side. Knowing what my absolute cold, under any circumstances, draw to first shot skills are, gives me a mental window for deciding, do I execute that murder program or not under this set of given circumstances. But the thing that also takes into account is, just because I successfully execute the motor program and put the shot where I want it to go, doesn't mean that one shot's going to stop the adversary. And those are things. But when we look at situations, we've all been in the parking lot and been approached by the guy, and you're thinking, okay, is this the go signal or not? And is he legitimately just trying to walk up and bum change, or is he trying to close distance because he's wanting to get close enough to me to just take a screwdriver in my ribs and rob me?
Right.
Drive off in my car, grab my iPhone and my wallet and run off, etc. And so you're having to wait for that go signal, or evaluate whether or not there is a go signal, I guess is a better way of putting that. And so knowing what your skills are with your equipment, the way you're carrying it, all those things, my own demand is I can execute X. That's valuable information to have for those situations. So I'm not discounting the metric side of things, but I also say the metrics are only part of that equation. So I can say, if his head's turned away from me and I can see his ear, I've got 2 seconds to make this draw shot. That assumes that one shot's going to stop the fight.
Right. And, part of what inspired this, I watched a video that someone had filmed with Jed Linsky at TACCON.
Okay.
And they were talking about what does the average person need? And he broke it down to, it was something to the effect of, if you can reasonably draw and hit a 3x5 card 5 times in under 5 seconds, you're probably doing okay. And I thought, for someone that teaches at such a high level that he does, that's a pretty bold statement, right? I mean, that really summarized it well. So I really appreciated when he just came out and said it, like, hey, if you can execute X, Y, and Z, you're probably going to go through life all right. And he didn't talk about, well, if you have this dot or that dot or these sites or this, this magwell or whatever it is. It was just real cut to the chase. And I really appreciated hearing that coming from someone that teaches or at what I would consider a master's degree level of study of handgun, right? Or study of implementation of handgun. That's a pretty, I wouldn't say elementary, but that's kind of like the junior high answer to, someone with a PhD answering it. So kudos to him on that one. I thought that was a really, really great statement. So now I'm lost, and you gotta put the rabbit, or you gotta put the hamster back on the wheel, Lee.
Yeah, of course, I do have to say, I thought it was funny. I know which video you're talking about. I have not watched it. The link to it came up in the Textcapade.
It did.
And I'm not taking anything away from the 2 individuals that were in that video, because their skill levels far exceed mine as far as like technical skill. But I just thought it was humorous that of all the genuine bona fide application experts that were at that event, if you want to talk about as far as, I'll say again, application experts that were at that event where that video was filmed, maybe you should have asked those guys what self-defense needs. But that's just a personal thing on it.
Yeah. Well, I enjoyed it, and I appreciated it for what it was. The interview, I mean, granted, there was a lot of people, and that's who the interviewer chose to interview. And I mean, I don't have anything against that. I mean, they obviously knew if Tom didn't think they added value to that crowd, they probably wouldn't be there, because, and much love towards Tom Givens. And all respect due. So,
well, that go back to the heart of what we're talking about today, though.
Right.
Basics mastered versus, and I'm not calling those 2 guys entertainment, because they are selling the heck out of some classes. Even if I was retired from this cop thing, I don't want to do their training schedule. I don't want to work that hard. And more power to them. But if you look at it at the same side, they are purely on, and I can't say that because I'm not taking direct classes from either one of them. But from what I see from the material that is put out from the public, they're more on the application, the technical side of things. And they're pushing those metrics. You shoot these standards to this level, you get this award and everything. And to your point, is we have to have that to keep people coming to training.
We do. I mean, I look at the block of information that I put out, and I mean, I have pressure tested it 6 ways from Sunday from different levels of shooter. We talked on that previous podcast a little bit about instructor development, and there are times when I am teaching courses, because I do everything very, very interactive, that I feel like I'm just, I am throwing the diamonds at people. But for every class, I have a couple of those people that are in the instructor world that are looking for instructor development. And I don't title it an instructor development course, and I'm not going to certify you to teach anything, because I don't feel like that's where my lane is.
And Rob hasn't authorized you to do that.
Who's that?
And Rob hasn't authorized you to do that.
Rob Garrett. Yeah. He hadn't signed off on my certificate, but But at an instructor level, like I try to speak to those instructor
Right.
level people when I'm doing
Yeah.
diagnostics with new shooters versus
Yeah.
really experienced shooters. But the core of the class is mastering the basics
Right.
in context, which is something I don't see a lot of. But if I
Right.
did that and I was the only guy in the whole United States that was teaching basics mastered, come to my course, you're going to get some instructor development and we're going to show you how to use the parlance again of Dave Spalding, get the gun between your nose and the bad guy and shoot
Yeah.
it. Like
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
goal. And then if I was the one guy on the island that was carrying the torch around the country, pretty soon people would go, yeah, we've seen that.
Yeah.
What's next? And that's okay. That
Yeah.
is perfectly okay. Because if it wasn't for, back in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, dudes like Bill Wilson and, Bill Rogers and Chip McCormick, Latham, Enos, Jarrett Koenig. I mean, all these dudes, we would pretty much be standing on a flat range,
Right.
shooting courses of fire under no real other conditions. So yeah, both of those things have to exist together.
Right. I think, the innovation tends to come from the technical side,
Yes.
and then it can be taken and, do it in the application world. And, you brought up instructor development, and it's one of the things that I kind of not struggle with. It's one of the battles that I constantly have in my mind. All right. I subscribe to the theory the most important thing in a gunfight is, like as Spalding says, getting the gun between you and the bad guy and then pressing the trigger without misaligning the gun or moving the gun. All right. I don't worry about split times and the like, to the point of, oh gosh, if you don't get this magic split time, you're going to fail. Now, obviously there's a difference between a 0.35 split time and a 1.25 split time.
Mm-hmm.
And that does have some carryover into the application world, provided that the target context allows for that.
Right.
All right, 1.25 split time when you had to divert the muzzle and move around and get to make the next shot. Okay, that may be, I'm talking about subsequent shots on the same target with no interruption.
Right.
Yeah, there is a skill level difference there. But I also think that when we're taking a student and we're trying to teach them to master those basics, if we are filling their head with so much things that are on the, I'm wanting to go from A to master or master to GM refinement levels, that we're making it more difficult for them to master those basics. But I also can understand that the opposite of that argument is that if we're not using the correct forms and everything as we're mastering those basics, it will make it harder to achieve that high level success if that's what someone is going to chase on the technical side.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, I kind of, for me, like my lane, a lot of what I teach, and I don't teach open enrollment very often because it's, I've got like 4 other hats that I wear. So that's one that I'm when I do it, I'm incredibly passionate about it. I just don't have the time asset to be able to do that. But one of the things I was sharing with a class of, conference attendees, so I have like a wide variety of people, was, I've seen, just with a little simple math, in the 11 years that I worked where I had a level 1 trauma center, somewhere in the neighborhood of like 500-600 gunshot wounds. And what they all had in common was I was interviewing them at the hospital. Like, let's keep that in context, right? Like,
kind of hard to interview someone that's not dead. I mean, that's dead.
Well, it may, you don't have arguments with the victim at that point,
Right.
not to sound callous, but,
Right.
but I mean, everything from accidental to intended to suspect to law enforcement officer, and all points in between, hunting accidents. I mean, one of the ones that stands out in my mind was one of the only one of two shotgun mechanical injuries I ever saw. And a dove popped up between this guy and his lovely bride, and the sun was in her face, and he got a face full of number 8s at about 20 yards. I get to have a conversation with him. I never had a conversation with somebody that was peppered with buckshot. Not one time. Not one slug injury did I ever get an interview with. So I went, maybe there's something to this handgun thing that a lot of people are missing out. And but sharing that in the context of these are real life situations that I've been at the crime scene. I've been at the hospital. I've seen them months afterwards. And you start to realize, hey, the things you need to pay attention to with a handgun are incredibly important. And, I've seen people with pass-throughs that it hit an innocent victim. It's like, that's not okay. To use the parlance of Wayne Dobbs, they all hit something. So, when you immerse people into that environment of, hey, I'm going to teach you a regimented set of tools to get you to where you can apply the handgun with almost monotonous regularity and predictable outcome, versus I'm going to push you to failure and then find out where you can improve, two vastly different things. And that's, one doesn't exist without the other, but the things that we need to put the emphasis on for certain people is vastly different than, the size of your wobble zone when you're moving. Okay. That's like master's degree level performance up here. But if you haven't gotten to the place where you can reliably place a projectile every single time you press the trigger exactly where it was intended or in an acceptable area of where it's intended, really not going to matter what your wobble zone is when you're moving. The other thing is the context of like wobble zone. I did this on my Patreon page. I showed a demo that I used to really break people's fixation on sights so intently that they drive them into the ditch, right? I talked through this deal. The whole purpose of that is to show you that, like, as long as you pull the trigger without moving the gun, the round's going to go there unless there's some other anomaly. So if you don't understand it in the context of the flat range not moving when the target's giving you very little feedback other than the holes in it, and then you go and you're taking off running down a flat range and looking at the wobble of sights, one can't exist without the other. You're not going to know what we're talking about, in the technical aspect, if you don't understand it in the basics mastered, right? Wordy. Sorry.
And here's to take that little string and push a little further. All right. Are you better off shooting them moving or shooting while you're moving? Okay. From a metric standpoint, set up the shooting problem and shoot it both ways and measure your performance on the target.
Yeah.
If I'm moving from 15 to 5 and taking shots as I'm moving from 15 to 5, or if I shoot it at 15 and then move to 5, you can measure those times. You can also measure the performance on the targets.
Yeah. Well, talking basic mastered, what if you're somebody that is incapable of running from 15 to 5?
Right. Yep.
That person probably needs to be pretty proficient with the basics mastered, because if running away ain't an option, then we need to make sure we do everything exactly right. DB was the first guy that really quantified assessment speed to me. And here's an interesting nugget that I will share. I will permeate to the masses. 0.35 to 0.50 is the time frame that you can shoot and assess and stop if you need to. Well, I'm going to throw my buddy Ernest Langdon out there. We did this exercise with how to measure predictability of human performance. And I won't tell you how he does it, but essentially what we came up with, the conclusion between the function of the gun, recovery of recoil on any modern platform, you can function that platform at about 0.35 and keep the shots going where they should be to 0.5. Now here's a guy that has a really healthy competition back and defensive background. And I'm like, odd how that number just crossed into both paths right here.
Yeah.
And then talking to DB when he sums it up with, you need to be able to shoot at an assessment speed.
Yeah.
And it is no faster than this. And it is never, all that to say, I went, oh, wow, we found the same conclusion in two different contexts.
Yep.
Funny how that works, isn't it?
Yeah. And folks, that there are a little give and take on some of these numbers. Like for me, I know from my own experimenting at about 0.40 is where I can confirm my sights and make conscious decision to make the shot and then everything else. That's if I'm making a decision for each individual shot. Now, you want to get me draw and put 5 on that target, I can give you much better split times than that. But for me to be making conscious decisions for each shot, it's at about 0.40. But for Bryan, that may be at about 0.36. For somebody else, it may be 0.43.
Yeah. But it also depends on size and distance of the target, right?
Yep.
But pretty reliably inside of like 20 yards, right around a half second shot to shot, somewhere in that half second window, I can make the decision to address the target again or not. That's another interesting one. How many times have we seen at a police in service, a target get shot and cut in half when it turns away?
Yep.
Because we were behind this decision-making curve and we launched one maybe that we shouldn't have. Now kudos for all the guys out there that have split a target in half. It's a cool party trick.
Let's see you do it on purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
Call your shot and then do it.
And while a target's turning at a quarter second, which, I had several of the young lads that are coming up over the years have had that happen. And I'm like, that's cool. But when the target turns away, it represents it's what? And they're like, it's not gone. I'm like, no, it's no longer a threat.
Right.
So yeah, you accomplished a neat little trick. You split the big playing card, but the representation of that in context is that is no longer okay to shoot.
Right. So
your decision-making brain was behind the curve of your trigger finger brain.
Yep.
And that's the result of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in a contextual application frame of reference, an incident may go from you're justified to use deadly force to not justified to you're justified to you're not. I like to call it the wheel of justification, because as the events are transpiring is, at the time you drew and initiated your initial shot sequence, you may have been justified to do that. But if between shots 1 and 2, the suspect or the perpetrator, whatever you want to call them, gives up and drops their firearm, okay, you got to be able to stop. Because if it's, I'm going to draw and put 2 to the body, 1 to the head, and between shots 1 and 2, the suspect gives up and drops the firearm. Okay, shot 2 is probably going to be legally okay, but that transition to go to the head and still put that one in there 3/4 of a second after the guy dropped the gun. In a world of there's security cameras everywhere, there, it's not just the cops with the body cams. People record my cell phones, there's security cameras everywhere, and if they're slowing down your incident, and it's not fair, you're seeing it in real time, you only got to see it once.
Yeah.
But you're being dissected in the judicial chambers going, well, just before shot 2 was fired, he dropped the gun, and then there was shot 3 was fired. So from the time shot 3 was fired, the person wasn't a deadly threat. Now, it happened in an instant, but that's the legal world we're living in right now. I think we talked about Tony McBride shooting on the podcast before. Yeah, she LAPD officer
Mm-hmm.
was involved in an incident. She's a competition shooter. There's video of her out there just absolutely burning down steel targets,
Mm-hmm.
quarter-second splits. She gets into this real life deadly force situation. Shots 1 and 2 each fired at about a half-second cadence. Suspect goes down. He's armed with a knife. Suspect attempts to rise back up. She puts shots 3 and 4 into him at about a half-second cadence for each one of those shots. Suspect hits the ground again. Suspect starts to rise again, and she puts shots 5 and 6 into it at about a half-second cadence. There was a clear distinction between her application use of the shooting and her technical ability, if you've seen both of those worlds from her. The LA Police Commission has determined that shots 1 through 4 are justified, but shots 5 and 6 are not.
Hadn't heard that. I hadn't paid attention to that.
Yeah, and so we're all sitting there thinking the shooting was good. Well, now we're getting down into a world in which this portion of the shooting was good, but that portion of the shooting wasn't. And I have not heard what the final outcome of the case was, because the PD internally ruled it a justified use of deadly force. Then it went to, they answered to a police commission, and the police commission, like I said, they dissected the shooting into shots 1 through 4 were okay, shots 5 and 6 are not justified.
Yeah. And yeah, we've probably all seen permeating the interwaves, the suspect with a gun that gets shot and takes about 30. There were about 30 shots fired after he fell on the pavement. And you're seeing all manner of curb, sidewalk, glass, cars, everything in the vicinity is getting just ballistically destroyed. And there may have been a time in our history where we went, well, okay. Now I don't find that acceptable. And I don't find it acceptable more in the context of what's going on around the bad guy. Wayne Dobbs made a great point, and I know I quote Dobbs and Haggard and DB like a complete fanboy, but Dobbs in one of his classes made the point of going, all right, how many of you all right now in his safety briefing said, would you haul steel targets to a shopping center parking lot and set them up and have a range day? And everybody's like, that's ludicrous. And he goes, yeah, but that's where all these things happen. How many of y'all would do that in your living room? And it's a fair point. And on the application side, something I went through about 7 years ago, I was involved in a nasty use of force. Nasty. I mean, it was one of those that it bordered on deadly. Well, it actually crossed the threshold of deadly force multiple times. But my skill level, knowing my skill level beforehand, I was like, wow, that's the easy button. We can keep chugging through this a while. My physical fitness level came into the investigation. Like my skill level, all my prior training, the talk of, well, how much training do you have with your sidearm? Because if you were not confident in it, then you made the right decision maybe not to employ it. If you're overconfident in it, you may have made the wrong decision not to employ it. How many times have you ever, has anyone on a flat range ever had that discussion? 0 times, right? But the point of it, the suspect, he's in prison now, and I've bear a permanent injury from that incident. But all in all, what kept the bad guy alive was the fact that I was like, man, in 1.2, if I can get 1.2 seconds worth of distance on this cat, game over. And it ultimately saved his life and mine. But there again, when we went through the use of force, the actual application of force, that was a 4.5 hour interview of, at this point, where was this person on your justification line of what you applied to him? And that's something that doesn't, like your average, Joe Sixpack that wants to go shopping, is never going to experience that unless that happens, unless that they have to employ that level of force.
Yep.
Like you said, shots 1 through 4 are justified. 5 and 6, we have a problem with. Well, it got down to, okay, you applied a baton strike to this location on this suspect's body. How many times before you decided that was ineffective and we moved? And what was the suspect doing to warrant that type of application of force? 4.5 hours of my life devoted to explaining piece by piece every second of that, in conjunction with radio traffic, in conjunction with where your backup is, in conjunction with, we have citizen cell phone videos. Like, okay, yeah, okay, we're going to review those in conjunction with this, to ultimately, I mean, I was cleared, justified, appropriate. Everything was good. Thanks for not shooting him. Moving on with life. That is the level of scrutiny now that the average citizen is under.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing that separates the people coming from the application side of the house and the people coming from the very technical side of the house. They have not ever experienced that
No.
level of scrutiny, that level of exposure to the legal system. I took a class from a very high level dot mill operator, very high level, involved in taking down suspect, enemy actors that you see get mentioned on the news. Hey, we finally got this guy. In a class, give the advice of whether or not it was legal to shoulder a AR pistol that has a pistol brace on it. Touch that pistol brace to your shoulder, because then does it become a stock? And it didn't actually touch your shoulder, it touched your shirt, was his advice. I'm like, yeah, you start trying to play that in front of a judge and let's see how far that goes. Now, I didn't jump up and down and go, oh, whoa. No, it's because my class was his class, everything. But I was just like, that's advice from someone who has never been in a courtroom.
Yeah. And when I was in, it was, hey, we cannot use 50 caliber ammunition against personnel, but you can shoot at their canteen. You can shoot at their shirt. If they're an enemy combatant, their shirt is equipment. And I'm going, yeah, that may be okay if we're overseas fighting a foreign army.
Yeah.
But trying to use that same type of logic in today's courtroom. No, that's not even going to be considered. And consequently, some of my friends that were involved in the global war on terror and did just amazing work on, did our biddings for the better part of 20 years. Towards the end of it, we're not fighting a standing army with uniforms.
Right.
We're fighting civilian insurgents that are armed enemy combatants, but and the rules of engagement started to really change towards, well, we're not shooting people that are carrying canteens and wearing different helmets and all this. We're essentially engaging the civilian populace of this country.
Yeah.
So we need to ensure that we are justified every time we do that.
Right.
And I had some friends of mine that were like, dude, I don't know how you're a cop, because as soon as we started suffering that level of scrutiny, and granted, it wasn't the level that we have here.
Right.
They're like, all of a sudden, go cyclic became, hey, hold off a minute. Let's make extra sure that we, and it cost some people dearly. It cost a lot of our service members dearly to operate under some of those constraints. And I can't get into the specifics of them because it's not something you just sit around and talk about. Right. But I had a very dear friend of mine that was like, I was involved in an incident. It didn't really think that much of it. And 2 days later, I am back in the US in front of JAGs and judges, explaining why I was on the radio saying certain words to make certain things happen.
Yeah.
And that's in a war zone, right?
Yep.
So here we are, continental United States. man, we don't play by rules of engagement.
Mhm.
We play by statutory exemptions in the Constitution, right? And case
Yeah.
law. Uh, so
Yeah. For people that have never experienced actual courtroom life, I mean, it's not what it looks like on TV at all. And there are times that, I've been involved in cases where to us it was cut and dry. And then a year and a half, 2 years later, we're in a courtroom and this tiny little minuscule piece over here that to those that were actually involved in it didn't really mean much to us. Now that's the seized focal point, of the whole court case. Uh, I can think of one involved in a shooting, which I can show you the video of the shooting, and everybody out there will watch it and go, "Oh yeah, that was justified because of X, Y, and Z, etc." But when it actually was shown to a jury, the whole question came down as to where the deputy's flashlight was pointed.
yeah,
Nothing that happened before or after that mattered. It was where was the deputy's flashlight pointed at the time. Now, the deputy was not on trial. The other party was on trial,
mhm.
but it came down to his justification. He was trying to claim a self-defense justification as to why he was being charged with aggravated assault on multiple deputies. And, it all came down into where the deputy's flashlight was pointed. But I show you that video, and everybody else, that question never came up in any of the online discussion that I saw on that incident when it happened. But I'm in the courtroom going, wow, we're playing the video back for that.
Yeah. If if you want one of the incidents I was involved in several years ago looked great, looked exceptional. Like
Mhm.
everything's good.
Yep.
And then it got played in 1080 HDI on an 84-inch big screen in front of a bunch of administrators.
Mhm.
And I subsequently got a little piece of paper in my file saying X, Y, and Z was good, but don't ever do this ever again, ever. And by signing this, you are admitting that you will never do this. And I mean, it was
Yeah.
very specific, and it was one minor
Mhm.
detail in that about 2-minute incident.
Yep.
And I'm going, and I don't even remember that.
Yeah.
What part of that happened? And then they go, oh, well, right here. See where this, and I'm like,
Yep.
oh, hey, there's HD cameras in there. Not that I was doing anything
Right.
like so egregious that it shocked the conscience and warranted charges. It was just,
Right.
hey, this little piece of this is not okay according to our policy manual in this subsection. And I went, duly noted, sign my paperwork, move on with life.
Yeah.
But that was the level of scrutiny from my own peers and supervisors and all that to say, we need to take corrective action on this one little
Mhm.
snippet from this incident
Right.
that we have poured over for days. Um,
And
now,
we've watched the video countless times. We've watched
it,
and to make that decision.
mhm.
I don't know what the current number of cameras in use for NFL play, but instant replay are. I know at one time it was 14 cameras
Mm.
in use by the league just for the purpose of instant replay reviews.
Yeah.
And we all see that they show the playback. The commentators are arguing about whether or not it was a catch or not. They go to the rules official in the studio, who's a retired official, and they hash it out and everything. They come back and then they say it's one thing. The umpire on the field calls it something else. We all see that stuff play out. That's the world we live in now. And if we can't make decisions on whether or not something is inconsequential as a complete catch or not, with 14 cameras watching it and the experts on the rules,
Right.
but now we're trying to do maybe a cell phone video or a surveillance camera or something like that, and playing like you say, that little one instance probably never registered in your mind because your mind filtered out anything that was not necessary to your survival at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But then now, as Tom Givens calls them, the great white shirts are sitting around watching, the video, and they're watching it back. What happened in this little instant right here between 0.35 and 0.42? Think about, oh, that's a policy violation.
Mm-hmm.
Or, oh, that makes this whole thing a non-justified use of force.
Yeah. And for me, fortunately, it was a minor detail.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've still got the copy of the paper somewhere.
Yeah.
And when I retire, I'll let somebody read it. It's
Yeah.
because when you look at the overall incident,
Mhm.
and I'll tell you the full story at TACCON, it has some comedic aspects to it, but when you look at how intensely the wording of the memorandum was written, you go,
Yep.
oh, wow, they're like,
Yeah.
it ended up being where I put a hand on a person at one point during this incident.
Right.
And I'm like, that happened in an instant, like that passed on the fly. Oh, okay. Like,
Right.
I mean, I didn't argue with it. I was like, oh,
Right.
I completely understand. Yeah. Policy
Yeah.
right here says this.
Yeah.
And it ended up being, a minor corrective action. Hey,
Yeah.
no, this isn't okay. Had that been, this action wasn't justified and this action wasn't justified.
Mhm.
And this was this was out of the bounds of policy and this is out of the bounds of policy.
Yeah.
Then I may not have had a career after that.
Yeah.
And, that was 7-8 years ago, but,
Yeah.
but for the armed citizen,
Mhm.
you don't get a do-over. You don't get a practice run.
Yep.
When the bell rings, the bell has been rung, and everything that transpires from that moment until the next rest of your life is under scrutiny.
Yep.
And
everything prior to that, because it's all going to get dug up.
Yeah. Every single Facebook post and Instagram post and all of that. And, I try to be a little more careful about those things nowadays. But still, some of them are still out there and they don't go away. So, anyway,
well, we had 2 deputies that were involved in a justified use of force here a couple of years ago. And when the outside entity that was doing the use of force, the criminal investigation into the, because guess what, folks? There are criminal investigations, whether or not someone gets charged. There's an investigation to determine whether or not there will be charges. They come look at it. They want to see every use of force these 2 deputies have ever been involved in.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, whoa, you're investigating this incident, not every incident they've ever been involved in, because those have no bearing into the legality of this incident. That ain't how the world looks at it anymore. We're going to look at everything you've been involved in, and your entire life is under scrutiny. And if they find things in your past life that don't jive, it's going to be used against you in this incident, even though it had no bearing on it.
Yeah. And, one of the things that LE guys here in the States, the scrutiny of past incidents, it's pretty commonplace all the way back into, you started the field training officer program on this date with this person. We're going to go through every document that person did, that how they trained you, corrected you, et cetera, et cetera. The days are coming that if you're an armed citizen, because I know some people that work in that realm of legal work, you're an armed citizen and you post that, man, I just took the whiz bang class from X, Y, and Z instructor over here to get faster at my split times, or my, to practice shooting on the move. There's a real high probability that those things are going to get called into court. Yeah. It's upon, if it hasn't happened yet, it's going to. And I've been kind of cautioning some of my instructor buddies about that. Like, hey, have a good lesson plan and be ready to defend it. Cops, we do that. That's part of the program, man. So.
Yeah, I see that you're a real retail salesman, but yet you're teaching this class on deadly force. Where's your background in that? And I can see that, and that's not necessarily coming up on the criminal side, but certainly on the civil side.
Yeah. Or, I went and took Bryan Eastridge's skill builder class. Okay. And in an interview, I said, well, Bryan said X, Y, and Z in that class. And that's what I did right here. And now Bryan's got to go in and give a deposition to say, no, that's not what I said. This is the lesson plan I follow.
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to get, I don't think it's going to get better.
Yeah. And, because one of the things, the difference between that happening on the government sector side and the private sector side is the government sector has deep pockets that the lawyers can come at. On the private sector side, there's not going to be the payoff for the lawyer, for the plaintiffs there. But even if there's no payoff, if you're an uncollectible judgment, there's still a lot of your life and a lot of stress you're going to have to go through.
Or how about this one? If you're an instructor and you're carrying instructor insurance,
yeah, that's the payoff.
You can follow the lawsuit by who's got the insurance that's going to pay. So I can see that becoming coming to the forefront of our little open enrollment training world real fast.
Yeah.
I had a gentleman named Doug Deaton on my podcast, and that was the bulk of the podcast. We were, I hate to say we were dancing around that issue, but we were really exploring that issue quite a bit, and how much over the lap there is in the armed citizen world now and the law enforcement world now. How much some of those tactics in the legal realm are coming into play. And I got news for you. The same attorneys that do the defense and the plaintiff work in the LE world are the same ones that are doing it in the civilian world or the armed citizen world. Sometimes when I say civilian, it comes from that stuff back there, and it's not meant to be a derogatory term to anyone out there. Cause I mean, I live in the civilian world now, but
tell the audience of this podcast about your podcast.
Oh, so I have the Off Duty, On Duty podcast for those of you who didn't know that. It's been going for 2 years. We're on our 2-year anniversary, I think today. Or maybe it was the 17th, but I released the first 5 episodes in September of 2020. And so that I try to release one a week. Sometimes it's one every other week. I didn't record the last week and a half because you caught me on the first. I bailed you out on the first day I've been able to talk for like a week and a half. Haggard came over to watch me teach at the conference, and I turned it over to Michael Burgess, my dear friend. He was AIing for me, and I was like, dude, you got to take this home. I can't talk anymore. And I sat down, and Haggard kind of looked at me and goes, dude, I came here to watch you teach. And I was like, I blew my voice up, pal. I can't talk. So, I got that podcast, and I do, we make EDC Belt Company Foundation belt that comes out of Yukon. Oh yeah. Nice hat. Thanks for that. We're growing every month, and that's from listeners like yours and mine that reach out there and want a good piece of kit to carry their gun on. So I got that. And then I do some under the guise of Eastridge Training and Consulting LLC is my open enrollment deal. And that I have not had a whole lot of time to focus my attention on lately because people have been buying belts. So, and then, I did recently, I wanted to plug, I just released a Patreon. It's very affordable. It's $3 a month. And I decided I didn't really want to put some of the information that, like home gun plumbing stuff that, how to service a 1911. Like I didn't want to put that out for the masses. Right. I kind of want to make sure a select audience hears that kind of stuff. So I'm working on I'm going to run an article a week, and it's everything from like how to make a good cup of coffee to like Swiss watches to J-frames and all those things that, people that know me kind of know that's some lifestyle stuff, some of that. So it's $3 a month for less than a cup of craft coffee a month. You can have access to that as well through Patreon. So
Bryan did on his personal Facebook page just post a really good video breakdown of the new Springfield double stack 1911.
Oh yeah. And that is what, that is what inspired one gentleman who I love him dearly. He will not do podcasts as part of his thing. He just doesn't enjoy doing them. But Mr. Greg Ellifritz, he called me about 30 minutes after that was over and goes, that content needs to be on Patreon. And I said, man, it's just what I do. And he's like, yeah, but you need to be a little more selective with the audience. And so that inspired it. And that video, I made it public. I did a full breakdown, and I had people that like Hanny McMood called me, and he goes, dude, I never really thought about trigger clearance on the back of the bow and why this was like that. And I'm like, Hanny's he's an old head 1911 guy, and he's calling me going, tell me about that. And grip safety timing, like who does that? Right. So yeah, I did that breakdown of that gun. And I think that gun will be, as it progresses, will be, if you want my take on it, it will be more viable in the coming months and years than it is in its current form. But if you are a 1911 guy, that 4.25-inch gun is kind of a bargain for what it is, if you know how to make them sing. And that's, they're no different than any other 1911. They're ammo sensitive. They're picky, and generally you have to do a little tune-up work, So
that video was shared into that Weems Guy Show Facebook group. So if you're going to that group, you can find that video. And it was good stuff. I sat there and watched it and heckled you by text message a couple of times in the middle of it. And,
yes, you did. And strangely, so when I first got into those, you kind of had to pry the grip frame off, and now they make it where like the bushings punch out. And I didn't know that at the time. Didn't do any damage to it, but I was like, man, this is not well thought. And then when I got it apart and I realized that was the case, I was like, oh man, I wish I could go back and edit that.
Yeah, it's funny because like I sent you a text message, not intending for you to like read it right then. And like on the air, and like because it was in the textcapade, I responded to something from earlier in the day, and I responded to it, and you read it off, and like somebody else texted me like, ask him something about whichever, and I'm like, so you wanting me now to intentionally mess with his actual live video?
Yeah, with friends like these. I mean, but that one, it paid dividends, and I tell people a lot that, hey, I have gunsmithed 1911s for the better part of 20 years. I don't make a living doing it. I don't make a habit of doing it. But I've barreled my own guns. I've built my own guns. And it was something that once the polymer frame generation came back, sunset of Brady Bill, I just kind of parked that in the, I might need to use that someday file. And now what I'm seeing is generations of people that were not affected by the Brady Bill that are jumping into a platform that most of us kind of left when the polymer guns got good. And I'm trying to add a little bit of that, not curmudgeonry, but some perspective about, hey, look, this ain't your favorite Tupper gun. It is a well-tuned machine. And if you don't know how to work on it, I mean, we got like 30 years worth of kids that have been driving that have probably never changed their own oil. So now you're stepping back into a platform that it can be very challenging to keep those things maintained, or you could get a Wednesday gun and it runs great the rest of its life. I mean, so, and I'm inspired to see that craftsmanship come back. I think it will inspire more people to do that. But after 2004, how many custom 1911 builders do you hear out there that are versus 1994? There were hundreds and hundreds of them. So,
we could take 200 of the same generation Glock, disassemble them, put all the parts into individual parts buckets, and then we could randomly go through and select parts and put the guns back together, and they would function and work just fine. I don't think you could do that with 5 1911s.
If you went back to the GI era when they were being built for service, you could. They would not be great. But something else we look at, those GI 1911s, originally from onset had a 5,000 round service life. How many of us shoot that in a year?
Yeah.
Right. So context, the newer guns are built way, way far superior than the old collector guns. But that gun was only ever intended to have a 5,000 round service life. So we're going up from there. Whereas your Beretta 92 and your M17 were certified at 20,000 round service life. That's the only two guns out there that ever have officially done that in the handgun realm. So it's kind of like, man, I got this brand new Toyota Tacoma out there that'll run for 150, 200,000 miles with minimal maintenance. And now I'm going to go buy an old panel truck, and I'm going to expect to be that as my daily driver. You're in for a surprise. Our mutual friend, Rick Remington, subscribed to my Patreon, and I did an article about 1911s where I have my three favorite ones, and they're all three broken. And then I have my G45 off to the side. And I'm like, look, these guns at their peak keep up with this one.
Yeah.
So, and Rick said, man, I'm a hardcore 1911 guy, and everything you said is spot on. Yep. I'm like, I lived with that. I lived that world. And now here it's coming back around again. It's just got more BBs in it.
Yep. I have an armorer certification on the old Smith semi-automatics.
Yeah.
The 4006s and the stuff that predates it. It was mainly it was a 3-day course on the third generation, but they had to talk about first and second generation as part of that. And then I went to the Glock Armorer School, which is a day long. Okay, I went to a 1911 armorer school. I had a 1911 that had problems, and I came back from the armorer school and I got rid of my 1911. Okay, I'll go grab a third generation Smith right now, tear it apart on this table that I'm sitting at. I ain't touching my 1911s. I just got rid of them all. And it's just because I don't want to. There's so much nuance in that and everything that's just like, okay, I understand my limitations. And I've never been the cool guy in my life, so I'm not going to worry about being the cool guy now. I'll shoot this old piece of plastic that I know that works.
Yeah. Yeah. And a little deeper perspective, Eric Gelhaus, we talked about, like, I went to Cylinder and Slide. Oh yeah, you're drinking water. Good on you. Eric had a Pistol Smiths Guild gunsmith on call for all the years he ran single stack 1911s. Eric, I'm not talking out of school, but he said, man, I decided, I want to learn how to work on and maintain these. So he went to a Larry Vickers build course, which is Vickers and Cylinder and Slide. There's only so many ways to build those guns the correct way, right? And he said, I got home and I bought an M&P Smith after carrying them for 19 years and having two. And when I went to Cylinder and Slide and learned all that nuance and all those techniques, I landed on Glocks again. And Larry Vickers, who he's at various times in my life, we've been really close, and he talked about, the unit, and I don't want to, like, I never went there. I don't know all that much about it, but he said, I was going to write a paper about how this unit was founded on the 1911, and we are never going to carry another sidearm because this is it. And walks into a meeting and they go, how's everybody feel about the Glock 19? And he goes, yeah, that'll work. Like,
yeah.
That's the most well-funded military unit on the planet. And they ditched that platform because it was too labor intensive to keep it running.
Yep.
You think, context here, perspective, like, and I know a lot of those guys that still run 1911s that love them and they're dedicated to the platform. Some of their retirees that's what they know and that's what they go with. Great. Yep. But I can't remember if Spalding said I can find parts for a Glock 17 in every gas station in America. It's just Cairo, Egypt, or Clint Smith, Cairo, Egypt to Cairo, Illinois. There's a Glock 17 somewhere.
Somewhere. For years I kept a Glock 27 for when I traveled, because the most common law enforcement gun out there at the time was the Glock 22. And I knew if I had the 27 when I was traveling that I could take magazines from 23s and 22s and make them work if I had to. Now, thankfully, 9 millimeters in it. So I'll run
So
around with a Glock 19 all over the world. Of course, if I'm going to some questionable places as far as legality, I go down to a 48 for the 10-round magazines. But I know I can get the stuff I need to make those work anywhere I go.
get with a 5/16 punch.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else you want to mention about your exploits?
Let's see. I have a podcast coming up on what is FTA with Steve Moses and my dad, Gary Eastridge. We're going to talk about, if you're an instructor, what is the FTA and what do they do for you? I got that one in queue. I'm going to start probably after the first of next year, booking some open enrollment courses. Again, they'll probably be Oklahoma, Texas, maybe Kansas a little bit. But that's going to start firing up. The belt company's got some other stuff in the works right now that I got to devote to, but and it looks like I'm probably going to retire from law enforcement after the first of the year. So I'm making all those preparations, and I don't get scared. Concerned is more that, like, a strong concern is more that the lingo, but and then I'll be at TACCon in March. So if you're there, come say hi. I usually carry some belts to sell in the back of the truck. Yeah, that's kind of it in a nutshell, man.
All right. Well, I am 2 days away from being 4 weeks post-op surgery on my dominant hand.
Yeah.
And I am looking forward to being able to go back to using it. Right now I'm right-handed, and right now I am carrying left-handed, which I think I can handle most things to about half of my previous skill right now. Going left-handed, provided I remember that's where the gun is and that's where I start from. I hope I have enough time to make that recollection and go to what is now the correct side for the firearm. I did want to thank Tim Guy, who would not let me back out of a class this past week that I scheduled before the surgery was scheduled. And I was like, twice I emailed Tim, I was like, hey man, just had this surgery thing come up. No, you're still coming. So I went and took the class left-handed. And so for all of you who's on the internet who say that I have not done enough work with the pistol mounted optic to comment, I took an instructor pistol mounted optics class, mirror image. So maybe I'm getting to the point where I'm deemed internet worthy to comment on pistol mounted optics. I've just got 5 of the things. I don't know what makes you think I'm anti-dot, but okay.
I've got 2 right here that I'm waiting for guns to come in to put them on. So
I had an Acro arrive at the office yesterday, and I haven't been able to pick it up yet because I'm not going into the office on a day off to go get the optic. It'll be there when I get back.
I might have made an exception for that one,
but so I'm very much looking for. I'm probably 4 weeks or so away from being able to go right-handed. Right now, I can press a trigger strong hand if I need to, but the problem is that it puts the grip in the hand, puts so much pressure on the incision point that it is excruciatingly painful. It's not to the point where I couldn't save my life, but it's to the point where it's just not fun. Now, it doesn't bother me using it as a support hand for recoil, but ran into some issues that doing that I had not anticipated. And so I'm probably going to do some really dedicated support hand only work in the next couple of weeks and try to iron out some things there. So maybe it'll make me better on the other side of it when I get better doing things both ways. But hopefully I will be able to get back to scheduling classes and stuff soon. I had to cancel one class because of the surgery, and just have not started booking things prior to. I've got something in January. That's the earliest I've got things booked. So hopefully that's going to come back out and I can actually teach a couple more classes for the end of the year.
Well, inquiring minds like John Hearn want to know, by March at the TACCon shoot off, like what percentage to 100% are you going to be recovered?
Oh, I would hope I will be back by then. I would hope so. Now, the Range Master Instructor reunion is at my place in about 3 weekends from now or 4 weekends from now, and I won't be back in time to compete for that. I am going to be teaching, but John's actually going to shoot my demos for me in the class. I'll do the teaching points, and John's going to do the live fire demo of the stuff. I may do some of it left-handed just to really show that it works, but so there's that coming. But man, it's just driving me nuts. Absolutely driving me nuts right now. I want to be back doing things the correct way versus this. I got to remember things. I don't like having to think about using the tool, and right now I'm having to think about using the tool. And so that's the drive there. All right, and just to wrap a bow on this, folks, we're not saying that technical doesn't matter. That's not what was said at any point in time in this podcast. If that's what you heard, that's on you, because that's not what was said by either one of us. And we're not besmirching any instructor out there at all. As far as that, we are trying to put things into some contextual framing. But my goodness, if people aren't having fun, they're not going to come to a class. And it is perfectly okay to go to a class to have fun. Have fun. I shot competition for several years, and I kept shooting matches beyond the kind of point where I was like getting an entertainment value from the matches, because I had a group of people that I shot with, and that I wanted to be able to go see them when I shot the matches. And here last year, when I started experimenting with the pistol mounted optic, I said, well, you know what? I need to go shoot some matches. So get some non-square range things. Well, my old crew wasn't there. And I went to 2 matches, and before they were over, I was bored and not having a good time and just wanted to go back home because I wasn't having fun. If I had been having fun because I was able to browbeat my buddy or something like that, and we used to have the peanut gallery where we'd hold up, scores after somebody did something, just make it fun and entertaining. Well, without that aspect, I don't find the matches that fun. And so if you derive pleasure from going from classes and chasing technical goals, there's nothing wrong with that at all. Just understand that there's a contextual base to the application side of it that you need to be adding into that mix. And for us guys that are on the application side of the house, when it was left completely up to us, we got Newhall.
Yeah.
We have to have that innovation from the technical side pushing us to drive. So as Bryan says, it can coexist, and it probably should coexist. Bryan, you got any final thoughts?
Yeah. One that I don't know that I coined this phrase, but all roads lead to gun sight.
Yep.
USPSA, IPSC, and all the defensive shooting we're doing, all roads lead back to gun sight at some point. No matter what your training level is, the big bear leather slap matches, it all starts there. And I would encourage anybody to explore that, because this last year and a half has been eye-opening to me.
Yep.
So,
yep. And it's amazing, to quote John Hearn, how much Cooper just intuned that he got right. That we can do all this testing, we can do all this now that we have video evidence on all this stuff, and all the technical ways of measuring skill and everything that we have. Kind of go back and look, and Cooper was right.
Yeah, he may not have been first. I don't know, but he certainly wrote it down, wrote it well.
Yeah. Well, he's the one that wrote it down and published it. That's why he gets the credit for it. Yeah. I got a couple of upcoming episodes that are going to be cool, because, we've been trying to, with a lot of the episodes, explore, what was going on around the same time as what was happening at Gunsight was going on in other parts of the world. Got some people from the Police Training Institute at the University of Illinois that are going to do episodes, particularly Sheriff Jerry Parsley is going to do one, and I'm looking forward to that. And got some other things. John Bowman may be doing one, and really we're looking forward to getting some more of the historical episodes pushed out. And Bryan, thank you for bailing me out today and getting an episode recorded. So we've got something to play tomorrow.
My
And
pleasure, man. Anytime.
thank you.
And you're welcome to come on Hanny's podcast anytime you want.
Can I bring Hearn with me?
Please do.
Okay, cool. Well, Hearn's not allowed to play until after 9 o'clock at night. So we do have to take that into consideration. And for the audience, we know that your most important asset is your time. And thank you for choosing to spend it with us.